This is a demonstration on how to create the thumbhole cuffs that can be used on a variety of the 5 out of 4 patterns. So I'm going to start with my fabric already cut to the dimensions that are needed for the size that I'm making. So I'm making a size small, so the pattern says that my piece should be 8 3/4 inches long by 8 1/4 inch wide. So the first thing I'm going to do is take the top of my piece and fold it down towards the bottom. I'm going to do this so I can mark the centers. So I'm going to use a pen. You can use chalk or pins or however you want to mark this. And I'm just going to mark the center at the fold on each side. Then I'm going to fold the top back up and I'm going to fold it in half vertically. Make sure my centers are matched. Now I'm going to refer to the pattern to get the measurements for the points that I need to make along this raw edge. So the pattern says I should have 4 points. You're going to have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So points 2 and 3 need to be 3/4 inches from this center mark that we made. So I'm going to measure down 3/4 inches. I'm going to mark this with a 3. You don't have to mark this, I'm just going to do it for this tutorial, just so we can see better how we're going to fold this. And then I'm going to mark up 3/4 inches from that center point. And that's going to be my point 2. And then for the extra small to the large, from point 2, we want to measure up 2 inches. Make a point. That's going to be our point 1. And from point 3, we're going to measure down 2 inches. And that's going to be our point 4. So now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine. And I want to use a stretch stitch. I'm going to use the lightning bolt stitch on my machine. If you don't have a lightning bolt stitch, you want to use a narrow zigzag stitch. And I'm going to stitch from point 2 to point 3. And make sure to back tack at both of these points so that your stitches don't come undone. So I'm going to go do that, and then I'll be back to go to the next step. So here is my stretch stitch. I still use the 3/8 inch seam allowance from point 2 to point 3. Get a little bit closer view there, you can see. So now, this is the part that can be a little tricky. I'm going to turn this so it's kind of like a tube with my seam facing up. And again, I have all of my marks on both sides of the fabric. So now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the piece on the right side. So these two flaps here. I'm going to take these, and with the right side of the fabric facing, I'm going to bring them like this and join these 2 points. So point 1 is going to meet point 4. I'm going to put a pin there. Like that. Then I'm going to pull this out and make sure all of this fabric in the middle here is pushed out of the way, because we don't want to sew through that. And we're going to line up our points 2 and 3 here. And I'm going to put a pin there. So now I'm going to sew from this point here, which is either going to be 1 or 4 depending on which side you're looking at, to this point here, which is going to be 2 or 3 depending which side you're looking at. And again, if you open this up, you want to make sure all this extra fabric in here is pulled out of the way so you don't sew it in that seam. So again, I'm going to use a stretch stitch, and I'm going to sew from this point to this point. And you want to stop as soon as you get to this point. Don't go over that point, that stitching. You just want it to adjoin that stitching. So I'm going to go stitch that, and I'll be back to do the other side. So here it is after I stitched, and I used a different color thread to make it a little easier to see here. From 4 to 3 here is a brownish color thread, and then from 3 across the fold to 2 is purple. So now this side is finished, so now we need to flip this out so that we can do the other side the same way, and that's going to be the other side of the thumb hole. So we're going to flip this out. I'm going to take these 2 raw edges here and line them up, and now you're going to have to pull this seam out so that you can get this to lay flat. And again, I'm going to stitch from the lower point here up to where the stitching meets. I'm going to pin it there and pull this out. And again, open this up and make sure all this fabric in the inside is pulled away from that seam so you don't catch it in your stitching. And I'm going to put a pin up here. I'm going to do the same thing that I just did. I'm going to sew from this lower point to this point, joining this stitch but not going over it. So I'm going to go do that, and then we'll be back for the next step. We're almost finished. Okay, so here is my other side. That looks just like the previous side we did. So now when I turn this out, you're going to see the thumb hole forming. When I turn this right side out, you can see right here are my 2 now sewn edges, finished edges, where the hole is going to be. So that's where your thumb is going to stick out in this cuff. So now the last part is to close up these open edges here. So how we're going to do that is we're going to fold this back here. I'm going to match up these edges here. So I'm going to fold this fabric out of the way. So this inside fabric I'm going to match up, and I'm going to stitch again using that stretch stitch from the edge of the fabric to where my previous stitching starts. So make sure that these seams line up, and I'm going to pin this here. Make sure all this extra fabric is out of the way. That's what makes this a little bit tricky, is you have all this extra fabric that can be in your way. So I'm going to stitch from the edge of the fabric here to where this stitching starts. And then I'm going to do the same on this side. So I'm just going to pin both of them right away and sew them at one time, just to make it a little bit easier and faster. And then our cuff will be ready to attach to the garment. So I'm going to go sew that, and then I'll be back to show you the final product. Okay, so now I've stitched along both sides of this V, and now my cuff is complete. So when I pull this up, you'll see I have a nice finished seam with a hole in it. So when you put it on, that is where your thumb will stick out. And now you just continue on and attach these cuffs to the sleeve like you would any other cuff. Hopefully that helps explain the process of the thumb hole cuffs if you were having trouble. And if you're still having trouble, feel free to comment on the 5 out of 4 Facebook page and we'll help you out. Thanks!